The sun bled crimson across the stark plains, painting the rocks of Whisperwind Canyon in hues of sacrifice. He was a warrior, Kachi, his hands more accustomed to the grip of a lance, the weight of a bow, not the fragile helplessness of a newborn child. Yet there he knelt, dust and sweat streaking his stoic face, before a dying settler woman, her life ebbing into the parched earth. Her eyes, filled with a mother's desperate fire, locked onto his. A plea, barely a whisper, that would shatter his world and forge an unbreakable vow. What followed would become a legend, a testament to an honor that knew no boundaries, born in the heart of the untamed West. Could he, a man of the Comanche, navigate the treacherous path ahead, shield this innocent life from the storm of violence that claimed its mother, and perhaps, just perhaps, find a sliver of redemption in the flames? The answer lay hidden in the dust, waiting to be disturbed. Kachi was a man apart, even among his own people. His gaze, sharp as a hawk's, missed little. He moved with a quiet grace that belied the coiled strength within him, a strength honed by loss and the unforgiving land. A shadow of a past sorrow clung to him, setting him on solitary paths, often leading him to the high crags of Hawk's Peak Mountain. From there, he would watch the distant plume of smoke that was Havenwood, a fledgling settlement carved out by newcomers. He felt no hatred for them, only a weary understanding of the changing tides. Their presence was a stark reminder of a shrinking world, yet his heart was not entirely calloused. He remembered a time when his own world had been shattered, a memory that resonated with an empathy he rarely showed. Miles away, unaware of the warrior who sometimes observed their kind, Sarah and David Miller rumbled towards Havenwood in their sturdy wagon. Their faces, though etched with the weariness of the trail, shone with the light of new beginnings. David, a strong man with kind eyes, often spoke of the Bar M Ranch, a piece of land his father, Martin, had toiled to secure. It was their inheritance, their dream, nestled in a valley said to be blessed with good water and fertile soil. They carried with them not just tools and supplies, but the deed to this future, a testament to a life they planned to build. They were good people, hoping for peace, blind to the darkness that coveted their dream. For the name Marcus Slade was already a venomous whisper in the region, a man whose ambition was as vast and merciless as the plains themselves. His Red River reavers were a plague, and their shadow was lengthening, inching closer to the unsuspecting Millers and the small community of Havenwood. The air, even in its stillness, held a gathering storm. The storm broke with the ferocity of a rabid wolf. Marcus Slade and his reavers descended upon the Miller wagon, not with a demand, but with a savage intent to erase. David, roaring defiance, fought to protect Sarah, to give her a chance, any chance. He fell, his lifeblood soaking into the thirsty ground, buying his wife mere moments. Sarah, a terrible pain lancing through her side, a deeper agony tearing at her soul, scrambled away from the carnage, the shouts of the reavers fading behind her as she plunged into the labyrinthine embrace of Whisperwind Canyon. She knew then, with a chilling certainty, that her time was short. The life within her, however, fought to be born. Kachi had been tracking Slade's men for 2 suns. Their brazen incursions into Comanche hunting grounds, their wanton slaughter of game, had stirred a cold anger within him. He moved like a phantom through the broken land, his senses alive, when the scent of smoke and fresh blood reached him. He found the smoldering remnants of the wagon first, the brutal tableau of Slade's work. His jaw tightened, a familiar coldness settling in his gut. Then, a sound, faint, almost lost in the wind, a cry of profound suffering. He followed it deeper into the canyon, his warrior's instincts guiding him. And there she was, Sarah Miller, backed against a sandstone outcrop, blood pooling beneath her. Her face was pale, contorted in pain, but her eyes burned with an unyielding light as she looked down at the squirming, crying infant in her arms, a boy born amidst chaos and death. She saw Kachi approach, a figure of formidable power, an enemy by all common understanding. Yet desperation stripped away all such notions. "Please," she gasped, her voice a fragile thread. She thrust the baby towards him, her arms trembling violently. "His name! Samuel! Save him! Please! Vow to me! Save my son!" Kachi froze. The air crackled with the raw intensity of her plea. His world, ordered by tribal law, by warrior codes, by ancient enmities, tilted on its axis. He saw not a settler, an adversary, but a mother, fierce and broken. He saw the infant, innocent, thrust into a brutal world. He saw her life fading, her gaze clinging to him, her only hope. Conflict warred within him, a maelstrom of duty, pity, and a strange, aching recognition. His own past, the faces of those he had lost, flickered in his mind's eye. Slowly, almost reverently, he knelt. His large, calloused hand, a hand that had taken life, reached out and gently touched the baby's downy head. The infant's cries hitched. Sarah's breath caught in a ragged sob of fragile relief. "I vow it," Kachi said, his voice raspy, foreign even to his own ears. "He will live." A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. Her eyes, still fixed on her son, softened. Then, with a final, shuddering sigh, her spirit fled, leaving Kachi alone with the crying child and the weight of an oath that would forever bind him. The silence that descended was profound, broken only by the baby's wails and the distant howl of a coyote, a lament for the fallen, and perhaps a herald of the perilous journey ahead. The warrior's hands, steady in battle, were clumsy as he lifted Samuel. The baby was so small, so vulnerable. Kachi looked down at the infant, a knot tightening in his chest. This was not his world, this act of tending. His path was one of solitude, of swift action, not gentle care. Yet, the vow resonated deep within his spirit, an anchor in a suddenly turbulent sea. He fashioned a crude sling from a piece of Sarah's shawl he found near her, securing Samuel against his chest. The warmth of the child, the faint, milky scent, was an alien sensation. His first challenge was immediate: survival. Not his own, for the plains were a harsh mother he knew well, but the baby's. He found a shallow cave, hidden behind a fall of scree, offering shelter from the biting night wind and the predators that roamed the canyons. He used his flint and steel to coax a small, smokeless fire from dry scrub, the tiny flame a fragile bastion against the encroaching darkness. Milk, the child would need milk. But from where? He was miles from any settlement, and his own village was too far, too uncertain a reception for a white child. Kachi's mind, trained to hunt and fight, now raced to solve this new, desperate problem. He remembered seeing a doe with a very young fawn earlier. It was a risk, a depletion of game he would normally avoid, but the vow demanded it. With Samuel bundled securely nearby, Kachi moved with lethal quietness, his bow singing once. He returned not with meat for himself, but with the doe, and carefully, awkwardly, managed to express a little of its warm milk into a cleaned turtle shell he carried for water. It was a poor substitute, but Samuel, after some initial resistance, drank weakly. Days blurred into a routine of desperate improvisation. Kachi hunted, not just for sustenance, but for anything that could aid the child. He learned to crush berries and mix them with water, to find the softest furs for bedding. He cleaned Samuel with wetted moss, his large hands surprisingly gentle. He spoke to the child in the low, guttural tones of the Comanche. Not words of comfort as a mother would, but stories of the wind, the stars, the hawk soaring free above Hawk's Peak Mountain. And slowly, miraculously, Samuel began to quiet in his presence, his tiny fingers sometimes gripping Kachi's own. But the shadow of Marcus Slade and his Red River Reavers loomed large. Kachi, even burdened with the child, did not abandon his vigilance. He made short, cautious scouting trips. His senses stretched taut. He saw the smoke from burning homesteads, heard the distant, chilling echoes of gunfire. Slade was not merely raiding. He was cleansing the land, his brutality methodical, and his men were searching. Kachi saw their patrols, more numerous now, their movements less random. They were sweeping the area, as if looking for something, or someone, they had missed. Were they looking for Sarah? For the child? Or something else she might have carried? The thought sent a chill down Kachi's spine. His vow was not just to keep Samuel alive, but to keep him safe. And safety was a forgotten word in a land under Slade's terror. Kachi knew then that this was more than a rescue. It was the beginning of a hunt, and he and the child were the prey. His observation of Slade transformed from a warrior's assessment of an encroaching enemy to a guardian's desperate need to understand a predator. Slade, back in his rough-hewn fortress at the stolen Bar M ranch, paced like a caged wolf. News had reached him. A whisper from a scout who'd found signs. Signs that the Miller woman might not have perished in Whisperwind Canyon immediately. And worse, the scout had found the tiny, discarded remnants of a newborn swaddling. A baby. Slade's face, already cruel, twisted into a mask of fury. It wasn't just about silencing a witness. Sarah Miller, or her husband David, had carried something he desperately needed. The original deed to the Bar M. The document that proved his claim was built on lies and blood. Without it, his burgeoning empire, built around the ranch's crucial water source, the only reliable one for 50 miles, was vulnerable. Find them. Slade snarled at his enforcers, his voice a lash. A woman, perhaps wounded, and a baby. There's a bounty, a rich one, for whoever brings them to me, or brings me proof they're fertilizer for the buzzards. He particularly emphasized wanting anything they might have carried. Search every homestead, every gully. Question everyone in Havenwood. Someone must have seen something. The Red River Reavers, spurred by their leader's cold rage and the promise of reward, intensified their brutal campaign. They swarmed through the territory, their presence a suffocating blanket of fear. Havenwood, small and isolated, felt the pressure most acutely. Men were beaten, supplies stolen, and a pall of terror settled over the dusty streets. Kachi, carrying Samuel, moved like a spirit through the harshest terrain, his knowledge of the hidden paths and secret waterholes keeping them alive. He saw the increased patrols, the smoke from new fires, heard the frightened whispers carried on the wind from fleeing settlers. There were close calls. Once, a Reaver patrol passed so near their hiding spot in a thicket of thorny mesquite that Kachi could hear their coarse laughter, smell the stale sweat and whiskey on them. He'd held Samuel tightly, one hand gently covering the baby's mouth, his heart a cold drum against his ribs. The baby, as if sensing the danger, had remained silent, his wide eyes fixed on Kachi's. The bond between the stoic warrior and the orphan child deepened with each shared hardship, each narrow escape. Kachi found himself watching Samuel sleep, a strange ache in his chest that was not entirely unpleasant. He would carve small figures from scraps of wood, a hawk, a wolf, and watch as Samuel's tiny hands reached for them. He was still a warrior, fierce and capable, but the sharp edges of his solitude were being subtly reshaped by the innocent life in his care. His quiet observation of Slade's men was no longer passive. He began to actively mislead them. laying false trails, creating diversions. He was not just hiding, he was fighting back, in his own silent, deadly way. The vow was a living thing now, pulsing with a fierce, protective fire. He had to understand why Slade was so desperate. It was more than just a surviving woman and child. There was something more, something that drove Slade's relentless pursuit. Weeks turned into months. Samuel was growing, no longer a fragile newborn but a sturdy infant, his eyes bright with curiosity. Kachi had managed, through immense effort and his profound understanding of the natural world, to keep him nourished and safe. He'd found a nanny goat with a kid, and after carefully observing, managed to secure the goat, ensuring a more reliable source of milk for Samuel. He'd made a more permanent, hidden camp in a series of small caves high on the slopes of Hawks Peak Mountain, a place few ever dared to venture. One evening, as the last rays of the sun painted the sky, Kachi was examining the few meager possessions he'd taken from Sarah Miller's side, items he'd kept bundled with Samuel. He'd looked through them before, finding little of apparent value beyond a few coins and a worn Bible. But this time, his fingers brushed against something stiff, hidden within the lining of a small, oilskin pouch that had held a locket. Carefully, he worked it free. Inside was a folded document, brittle with age, and a letter. Kachi, whose dealings with traders and sometimes treaties had forced him to learn the white man's script, albeit slowly, spread the paper out in the dim light of his small fire. The document was a deed. The official markings, the signatures, the detailed description of land boundaries. It was the original title to the Bar M Ranch. Signed over from the Bar M Ranch. Signed over from the Bar M Ranch. Kachi produced the oilskin packet. He explained what he knew, what he'd found. He spoke of Samuel, of Sarah's dying plea. Amos listened, his expression unchanging. But Kachi saw the flicker of interest, the hardening of his jaw. Slade's built himself a kingdom on that water, Amos said finally. If that deed is real, it could bring him down. But it'll take more than paper. It'll take blood. I know, Kachi replied. Slade has many guns. But the people of Havenwood, they suffer. They fear. Give them a reason to fight, a chance to reclaim their lives, and they might find their courage. Amos considered this. They're scared, but some are getting desperate. Slade's tightening the noose. He looked at Kachi, a new respect in his eyes. A Comanche warrior fighting for a settler child's birthright. The world's gone mad. Or maybe, he added with a grim smile, it's starting to make sense. Over the next few days, Amos, using Kachi's information and the potent symbol of the deed, began to quietly rally support. He spoke to the blacksmith whose son Slade's men had beaten, to the storekeeper whose supplies were constantly extorted, to the quiet farmers who saw their hopes dying. He even reached out to a small group of Kachi's own people, warriors led by a young brave named Tonkawa, who saw Slade's unchecked power as a blight that would eventually consume them all if not stopped. The promise of reclaiming stolen horses and striking a blow against the Reavers was a powerful motivator. The plan was daring, bordering on suicidal, but it was their only chance. They would use the annual Founders' Day celebration Slade was planning at the Bar M, a grotesque display of his supposed benevolence, as cover. While Slade and his core men were distracted, a small, determined force led by Kachi and Amos, bolstered by Tonkawa's warriors and a handful of armed townsfolk, would infiltrate the ranch. Their objective: secure the main house, find Slade's own fabricated land documents, and confront him publicly with the true deed and with Samuel, the living heir. The day of the Founders' Day celebration dawned hot and still. The Bar M was abuzz with activity. Though the merriment was forced, the settlers attending more out of fear than festivity. Slade, preening in a new suit, held court, oblivious to the storm gathering on his horizon. As dusk began to settle, Kachi, Amos, and their small band moved like shadows. Tonkawa's warriors, using their knowledge of infiltration, disabled sentries at the perimeter. Kachi, his senses heightened, led the way to a seldom-used service entrance at the rear of the main ranch house. Inside, the sounds of Slade's party were a dull roar. They moved swiftly, neutralizing the few guards inside. Amos, who knew the layout of the house from before Slade's takeover, led them to Slade's office. It was gaudily furnished, a testament to stolen wealth. While Amos searched for Slade's forged papers, Kachi stood by the window, watching the courtyard, his hand resting on the handle of his knife. He carried Samuel, now a toddler of nearly 2 years, in a sling on his back. The boy quiet, sensing the gravity of the moment. Amos gave a grunt of satisfaction, holding up a sheaf of documents. Got him. His fake deeds. It is time, Kachi said. They emerged from the house just as Slade was making a pompous speech, raising a glass to his prosperity. Kachi stepped into the firelight, Amos beside him. A hush fell over the crowd. Slade's eyes narrowed, surprise quickly turning to murderous rage. What is the meaning of this intrusion? Slade bellowed, his hand inching towards his gun. Seize them! These men are here under my protection, Slade. Amos's voice boomed, clear and strong, and several of the Havenwood men with him raised their rifles. Slade's reavers, surprised, hesitated. Kachi stepped forward, holding up Martin Miller's deed. This land is not yours, Slade. It belongs to the son of David Miller. He turned slightly, revealing Samuel on his back. The child, blinking in the light, looked out at the stunned faces. A collective gasp went through the assembled settlers. Lies, Slade shrieked, his composure shattering. That's a forgery. The Millers are dead. I own this ranch. He drew his pistol. But Tonkawa and his warriors chose that moment to emerge from the shadows surrounding the courtyard, their bows drawn, arrows aimed at Slade's reavers. The standoff was complete. The only forgery here, Slade, Amos said, throwing the papers he'd found onto the ground. Are these deeds you concocted? We have witnesses to your murders, to your thefts. Slade, cornered and exposed, desperation etched on his face, made a fatal error. He lunged not for Kachi, but toward Samuel, a wild look in his eyes, perhaps to snatch the child as a shield, or to silence the last Miller. Kachi moved with blurring speed. He pushed Samuel safely behind him with one arm, while his other hand drew his long knife. Slade, overreaching, stumbled. Kachi didn't hesitate. There was no honor in Slade, no warrior's code to respect. There was only a rabid animal to be put down. The fight was brutal and swift. Slade, for all his bluster, was no match for the Comanche warrior's focused fury. A choked cry, and Marcus Slade, the tyrant of the plains, fell into the dust of the ranch he had stolen, his own blood now staining the land. A stunned silence followed. Then a ragged cheer went up from the settlers. Slade's reavers, seeing their leader fall and finding themselves surrounded, threw down their weapons. Justice, swift and raw, had come to the Bar M. In the aftermath, chaos gave way to a fragile order. Slade's gang was rounded up. Their reign of terror decisively ended. The Bar M Ranch, its true ownership now undisputed, became a beacon of hope rather than a den of thieves. Young Samuel Miller, too young to understand the monumental events that had secured his future, was placed under the temporary care of a kind woman from Havenwood, with Amos Cutter agreeing to act as foreman and protector of the boy's interests until he came of age. Kachi watched it all, a quiet figure on the periphery. His vow to Sarah Miller was fulfilled. The child was safe, his birthright secured. He could have faded back into the wilderness, returned to his solitary life on Hawks Peak Mountain. But something had shifted within him. The emptiness that had once defined his existence had been filled by the unwavering purpose of his promise. and by the unexpected bond with the boy. He did not leave immediately. He stayed long enough to ensure the transition was smooth, his presence a silent deterrent against any lingering remnants of Slade's influence. He taught Amos some of the land's secrets, the hidden water sources away from the main well, the ways of tracking, ensuring the ranch would prosper under honest hands. He even shared a quiet smoke with Tonkawa, a mutual respect forged in shared danger. When it was finally time for him to depart, he went to see Samuel one last time. The boy, playing with a carved wooden hawk Kachi had made for him, looked up and gave a gurgling laugh, reaching out with a sticky hand. Kachi allowed his stern features to soften into a rare, almost imperceptible smile. He touched the boy's head gently, a silent farewell. As Kachi rode away from Havenwood, the sun setting behind him, he was no longer just a solitary warrior. He was Kachi, the vow-keeper, the guardian who had bridged two worlds out of an act of compassion. The trail ahead was still his own, but it was no longer quite as lonely. He had stared into the face of death and desperation, and chosen life, chosen honor. And in doing so, he had not only saved a child and brought justice to a terrorized land, but had also, perhaps, saved a part of himself. The tale of the Comanche warrior and the settler's baby would become a whisper on the plains, a legend told around campfires, a reminder that even in the harshest of lands, the most unlikely bonds could be forged, and the deepest vows could indeed be unbreakable. His silhouette against the fiery sky was that of a man who had found his peace, not in the absence of conflict, but in the fierce, unwavering embrace of a promise kept.